Yo, JD here, Toolinus, and as you can see by this video title here today, this has been a heavily requested video, and today we're going to be going through all the car setups, basically all the components, and I'm going to go into as much detail as I possibly can. Not gonna lie, I'm not an F1 expert, I'm not an engineering expert or anything. I'm just gonna tell you my experience of the game, what works for me, what I would recommend, and for me, what actually each component does, because we all know sometimes when we select something, it says what it says, but actually performs something in a slightly different way. So I'm just going to give you my take on it today, just running through in as much detail as possible. So if you do like this video, please leave a like, and let's get into the setup now. As my kind engineer gives me the nice little tablet, so we'll just go on default. So starting with the basics, aerodynamics. Don't really need to explain this too much, but we're gonna go into some serious detail here. So for the front wing, basically the further up, thank you, the further up we actually put it, the more turning we're actually gonna have. So the further up you put it, the more turning you're gonna have, and the lower you put it, the less the more understeer you're definitely gonna have, but it's gonna reduce drag. So you're gonna be faster in a straight line, but you're gonna have a lot more understeer, not as much oversteer, because the car's a lot more balanced on the rear because you've got more rear wing. But if you put it above the rear wing, so say if we ran 11.2 or 11.3 or 2 or something like that, it would have absolutely insane turning, but the rear, your traction would be really poor, because it's just not balanced enough. It's not balanced because the car is moving too quickly into the front portion of the corner, so your rear is really going to step out. You're going to have a lot of oversteer. You'll be quick in a straight line, fairly quickish, but not as quick as you would be if you ran like 5.2 or something, because obviously your wing's a bit higher. So the lower you put it, the faster you're going to be in a straight line. But you're going to have a lot of oversteer. There's a lot of insane turning, but you're going to have a lot of oversteer. The traction is going to be pretty poor off corners. So what I've typically been running in setups, I've been running at 7.6, 8.7. For me, the maximum difference you really want to go is like 2 difference, just to get a good balance. I feel for me, having a bit more turning than rear wing is quite important. Having a low rear wing is definitely a must. You definitely do not want to be doing this, because turning and corner grip in this game, it is really important. So having about 1 difference of the rear wing, just so you can still have some straight line speed, but having a good balance between good turning, good downforce, and straight line speed. So if you ran 1.1, if we really go basic, this would be your fastest possible straight line speed. It'd be insane in a straight line, but in corners, the traction would not be good, because the rear wing is really what decides the traction. So if you put it up here to 111, you'd have insane understeer, but you would have insane traction, because all the wing is going to the rear. It's going to the absolute max, so you'd be having so much traction. But then on the straight, you just wouldn't be good, and the turning as well. Just wouldn't be good, and vice versa. If you put 11.11, this would be your best scenario. So you have the maximum turn in and the maximum traction, but straight line speed, it'd be like a McLaren in real life. So that is the aerodynamics, and what I do recommend, what I've been running is 7.6. For career mode, I think this would be the baseline for a Mercedes, depending what tracks. Some tracks are around 8.7. Monaco, which I'll be doing later today, it'll probably be like 11.9 or 11.10 or something like that, but 7.6. But if you're in other cars, then this is something you really got to figure out yourself in career mode, and how confident you are, what your driving style is. Do you prefer it being quick on the straights, then keep momentum up through the corners, or do you really want downforce and just try and hold off the AI on the straight, pretty much? But that's something you need to go through. Transmission, 75. I've been using 70/70, and I'm going to try and explain this the best I can, because it is quite tricky to understand. So your adjustment on throttle, pretty much the higher you put it, the more power is going to go through when you're actually on the accelerator, when you're actually on the throttle. So you'll be able to pick up the traction, pick up the throttle. It'll be a lot more responsive than, say, if you put it on 0 or I'm not sure. I don't think it's 0. I think it's 50. Yeah, it's a 50. So I put it on 70-70. And for me, I feel it's pretty important to have it on balance, because you have one overcompensating the other. It's a bit of an unbalance. It's pretty unpredictable to actually use. So I use 70-70 at the moment. I just feel you don't want it too sensitive, because sometimes when your tires go off and when you're going through corners, you really want it to you really want to like just kind of feed it through in corners that's on the throttle. If you have it too responsive, then it's going to be pretty difficult to actually control, especially if you're on a controller where you've only got that range of motion, or quite a short range of motion. You do want it fairly low. I wouldn't go above 80% really, in my opinion. I've been experimenting with 75, 75 or 72, 72. At some tracks it does work. It depends how confident you are really, but for me, as a baseline for every car, I wouldn't really go above 80%, because I think that would be quite unpredictable to actually use. So if we go to the off throttle now, and for this is just how the power is actually generated when you're off throttle, as it says pretty much. And my experience of this is the higher I've actually put it, so say if I put it on 80 or something like that, when I'm actually going off the throttle, the car just really just pushes on into the corners, and that's something I don't really want. I really want it to just be me in control with the engine braking. So the higher you put it off, the more it's going to push on in the corners. And for me, as I said, I think 70-70 is a really good balance. It could give you possibly better traction if you put it up a bit more, but going off the throttle, going into corners, I think it's a little bit too much. So again, 80 is probably the maximum I would really go on this, but I feel it's pretty important to do a balance. You could maybe put this up a little bit more, but I think it's pretty important to have quite a big balance between the two. So as the suspension geometry, otherwise known as the alignment on previous games, as we've seen in previous games, it's been all the way to the left and all the way to the right. And that's pretty much been the norm, pretty much for the previous games. You haven't really seen anything different other than that. On this game, things are slightly different, because when I've actually done this, it hasn't really worked too well. So normally top two to the left, so the camber, the further left you go, the more responsiveness you're going to have. So more downforce you're pretty much going to have in the car, and you have a little bit of reduced straight line speed compared if you put it over to the right, but you're just going to have a lot more corner grip, a lot more initial responsiveness when you're actually turning into the corner. When you've been pulling up, which I have been recently, for me, this just gives me better traction. It gives me better stability. It doesn't give me as good cornering actual speed, so it makes the car quite a bit stiffer than what it was. It feels, the reason why I like it is because it actually gives me a lot more stability. It just makes the car really quite comfortable to actually control. Whereas if you had all the downforce, yeah, it would be great, having that initial turn. You may gain that little bit of time into the corner, but you'll have a lot more oversteer. It's quite difficult to control, especially for tyres in this game, where the tyres are quite sensitive. When they do go off, they're quite hard to control. I think having a stable car is pretty important. So I typically have it around about here, just to have a bit more on the stable side, while still having a little bit of the performance of the initial responsiveness. I thought that's pretty important to me, and it's the same for the toe below. So if we go down here, typically it's been around here, but recently I've been doing it the other way, just to give you a little bit more of better traction, to just give me that little bit more stability. It will reduce the responsiveness for me personally in this game, but again, it just gives you a little bit more stability, and that's something I definitely want. So typically I've actually ran this, I've actually gone the opposite to what it has been in the previous games, and this is just giving me the most stable setup. Despite what it says, it gives me the most stable setup. The car doesn't step out, there's not much oversteer, under braking the car's really stable, whereas vice versa, if you do the opposite, you'll have the maximum turn-in performance, but you just won't have the stability, which I think on this game, stability is probably key to this game really. You really need a stable car. As for this, we're going to go on the suspension. So F1 2015 had something similar to this on the previous games. It was quite a bit different. We had 4 components in the previous games. But for this one, I've been recently doing 11, 11, 11. And the reason why I've actually been doing this, because the further right you pull it, again, it just gives you more traction. It just gives me more stability. And I feel traction and stability are really important in this game. The exit speed you have on corners in this game are really, really important. You can gain time through the corner itself, but on the exit, on the traction, when you're going on the throttle, is pretty much the deciding factor on what your lap time's really going to be on this game. So putting it all the way to the right, it says it will increase tyre wear, which it does, but for me, racing in a social race yesterday, a race around China or something like that, in the 50% in like an AOR social, which I did well and then I won that race. A few people had punctures because they couldn't go as long on the tyres, but for me, I was actually driving really, really cautious on the throttle. I wasn't really trying to generate any wheel spin. I was going lean in corners and traction zones. I was actually going off it in lean and then going to standard once I was actually up through the gears, kind of like 2014, but not quite as drastic as that. And I feel most of your tyre wear can really actually be controlled for you, the actual player itself, rather than the setup. The setup does decide how much it wears, like the level of wear, which can be a little bit off-putting, but for me, I think of just how you really actually drive is really the biggest thing in tyre wear, and how long you can actually go on the tyres and how consistent you can be. I feel in league races, you're going to be pushing about 80% most of the time, just to try and keep the tyres in check, keep it consistent, because consistency in this game is going to be pretty much everything in terms of racing. Like, it was all good having the one lap pace and everything, but consistency is going to be the absolute biggest thing. So this is what I've been doing recently. For the rear anti-roll bar, I've actually been putting it down because this actually gives you a better traction. This is like more responsiveness, but this gives you more traction. On the rear tyres is mainly what it's actually driven through, the power's driven through. You really want just good traction in this game. So that's why I normally put it to 2 to 4 or something in this. So for the front ride height, don't really need to explain this too much. So it's just the distance between the car and the track. And yeah, the lower you put it pretty much, or the increase, if you increase it, it will increase the drag profile. So it won't make it as fast in a straight line, but it will increase the cornering. For me, I put this on about 5 because just to have a bit more straight line speed, just to try and get a good balance between these two, because I've already got the wing doing the work for me with the aerodynamics and everything. I just want to just try and have some straight line speed at least. So this is really kind of self-explanatory in this. If you read it on the actual setups, it'll basically tell you. So conversely, an increased ride height will increase the vehicle's drag profile, causing reduced straight line speed. So if you further up you put this, the slower straight line speed you're going to have, but it won't be, it'll be better in the corners. And if you put it down, you have more straight line speed, but it won't be as good in the corners. So this is typically kind of the setup I'll be running at the moment. This is what I mainly am running at the moment. As for the brakes, as you know, if you've seen my setup videos, I've been running about 82%, I believe, at the moment. So yeah, 82%. Brake pressure, obviously, the higher you put it, the increased stopping distance you're actually going to have. So the shorter distance you're going to be, well, the later you're going to be able to brake, reducing the stopping distance between you and the corner. For me, I could put this to, I run no ABS, I run no assist. I could put this to 90, I could put this to 95 or something. I could probably drive it. You'd be locking up a little bit more, but you could still be driving it. For me, I think it's quite important to not put it too high, because you don't want to be coming to a complete stop in corners, especially slow speed corners. You want to be letting the car flow through the corners. You want to still carry the speed, so you want to be braking hard, but you don't want it to be so drastically coming to a stop that it's going to just kill your momentum through the corners. So I feel it's really, really important to just, for me, I would say 85% would be the maximum I go, because you can still brake quite late on this. On previous games, I used to run like high small as well, which is typically what this kind of setup is for me. So I can still brake fairly late, not as late as some other people, but I can carry more speed through the corners. I don't come to complete stop. It's just easier for me to carry more speed through the corners, and yeah, that's something I'm really quite comfortable with in this game. So you all probably will always see me run this, and the higher you put it as well, the easier it is to lock up, which creates more tyre wear. On this, I do lock up sometimes a little bit. You always do lock up on some corners, but this has been working for me really, really well. And as you can see from the front brake bias, you want it more towards the rear of the car. That's quite beneficial if you want to go through high-speed corners. So if you're going through like Magnets and Beckett's, if it's braking towards the rear of the car, it'll make it quite easy to change direction. But the downside of this, it will actually give you more oversteer. So if you put it to the front, it will be a lot more stable. It won't create as much oversteer. It'll be really, really stable, but it'll be a lot more prone to locking up. And it'll just feel really stiff going into corners. You won't be able to move the car around as much as if you put it to the rear. So I typically have it on about 60 because it just enables me to have a good balance between the rear and front, and just keeping the car in check, just keeping it stable, making me able to change direction fairly easily whilst having quite a stable package as well. So this is really my sweet spot at the moment. I may be changing this a little bit, but at the moment, this really is my sweet spot at the moment. As for the tyre pressures, quite a few different opinions in this, but for me personally on the game, the higher you put this, the more straight line speed you're going to get. It's not going to be a huge difference, but you do have more of a straight line speed. The car just feels quite a bit floaty really. On the track it just feels not as good as if you put it down, so you got a more straight line speed. But for me, I have it typically on, I think it's like 23, like 21.1 or something like that, just having a bit more on the front. And then basically the lower you put this, the more grip you're really actually going to have in the car. I find I have more grip and doesn't feel as floaty on the track. You're going to have slightly reduced straight line speed, but overall in lap time you're going to be gaining more time in this. So the lower down you put it, the more responsiveness you're actually going to have. So this is something I'm basically sticking with at the moment, and it really does work for me. As for the weight distribution, with this, the more you put it towards the rear of the car or to a backward, for me, this just gives it a really just a stable feel to the car. So I've always been running 11, and as you can see here, even the minor adjustments to the location of the bars within the chassis can have a pronounced effect on the overall vehicle balance. Moving the bars to the rear reduces understeer, causing, or conversely moving the bars towards the front reduces oversteer. So yeah, moving it towards the rear just reduces understeer. It just gives you the maximum turning really. And for me, whereas if you put it down lower, if you put it to the more of the front of the car, it's going to reduce oversteer, definitely, but you're going to have a lot more increased understeer. So putting it to 11, this just gives you the maximum pretty much downforce in a way for the corners. It just gives you maximum attack into the corners. So you could put it in 6 just to have a balance between it, or maybe 7, or yeah. But for me, I just put it on 11 because it really just gives me the maximum I need on actually attacking the corners. Where if you put it on 1, it'd be really, really stable and you wouldn't have like any oversteer at all, but the car would just be really, really bad understeer. And on this game, you definitely need turn in, but for me, 11 seems to be the way to go. I've been trying it a little bit lower, but 11 really does work for me. As for the fuel, you know that already. I normally go out, when I do an online race, I normally set like, you have to set that 1 lap, because if you set more than 1 lap, your tyres are just going to be really, really screwed for the race. Unless you're doing a full quali, then your Q2 fastest time, that's the one that counts. But in this, if you're just doing a short quali where your fastest tyre counts straight away, then you definitely want to be doing 1 lap. Anything more than 1 lap, and yeah, you're going to be really, really suffering, definitely in the race. So that is my explanation on the setups. And really, as I said, I'm not an engineering expert. I'm not a, an F1 mechanic. I don't know exactly all the components. I wouldn't be able to know this without actually experimenting myself. So this is basically something that has been working for me in the game personally, and I feel these settings really do well, how I change it. And this is giving you an idea of how I actually set up the car. As for career mode, you want to be probably playing around, not maybe a little bit of the suspension, but mainly the front wing or the aerodynamics. If you're having a slower car, you maybe want more downforce, but it depends how you drive. If you're a guy who really likes attacking corners, then up the downforce. No, not having really a difference of 2 or anything. But if you're someone who is confident and really wants some momentum through the corners, then maybe actually put it lower and see if you can actually fight off the air on the straights and really just keep it behind through the corners. As for setups online and like league racing stuff, my time trial setups are the setups I actually use online. As I said, I feel mainly the tyre wears down to actually how you drive, for me personally. Obviously, there's a few things you can change the setup to actually reduce the levels if that's something that's off-putting for you. But for me, I'll be doing a video on it as well where I'm showing you how cautious I'm actually am on the throttle, how I'm using my fuel and stuff as well, because that actually can have quite a big effect. But basically, just avoiding to lock up, trying to not go 100% on the brakes, which will cost you lap time. It'll cost you maybe a couple of attempts a lap. But overall, punches are quite easy to get in this way. And as we saw yesterday, a few of my friends in the races, they had quite a few punches, but we managed to skate through without any punches. So I feel that's mainly down to the driver and actually your driving style not being as aggressive on the wheel, on the throttle and the brakes. So that is my explanation of the car. So that's me trying to go in as much detail as possible. If you want to ask me anything else as well, please post it in the comment section down below, like the video. And as I said, my time trial setups that I use, my time trial videos, those are the ones I'm actually using in the race at the moment. So hopefully that answers your questions. So if you've got any more questions, post it down below. Thank you so much for your support recently, and I will catch you next time. Peace.
Let me see where we used to cross the line.